Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. We come now in our ongoing series on the Westminster Shorter Catechism to question 96. We've just been going through what the Catechism has to say about baptism, and now we come to a brief foray into questions related to the Lord's Supper. Question 96 says, what is the Lord's Supper? And the answer given is this: the Lord's Supper is a sacrament wherein, by giving and receiving bread and wine according to Christ's appointment, his death is showed forth, and the worthy receivers are, not after a corporal and carnal manner, but by faith, made partakers of his body and blood, with all his benefits, to their spiritual nourishment and growth in grace. And I am happy, friends, after having some uncertainties and misgivings about what they had to say about baptism, to come back to my normal posture of, aren't these guys great and didn't they do a great job? That's my perspective on this question. And not only that, it's they're doing great in a place where the church in our day does pretty poorly. And I'd really love for God to allow the church to come back to embrace this perspective. And where is that? One, first, the contemporary church is profoundly anti-sacramental. We don't pay much attention to the sacraments, and especially to the Lord's Supper. It takes up time. It's not entertaining. It can be introspective. And believe it or not, in most churches, introspective is not something that the leadership is looking for, because it can tend to turn people away. And particularly when that introspection focuses in on the reality of our own sin. But there are other reasons as well. It's again, takes up time, takes up effort. It is seen in most evangelical churches as something merely helpful in a kind of mnemonic way. And a mnemonic device is a memory device where you sort of put an image in your head of the thing you're trying to remember. And so we look at the Lord's Supper typically as as God's flannel graph. That what's happening when we come to the table is God is trying to remind us of how sinful we are and how Jesus died for us. Now, I'm all in favor of being reminded of how sinful we are and what Jesus did for us. But that's not what the divines say about what the Lord's Supper is, nor would it be what I would say. It says instead, not only is his death showed forth, but that worthy receivers are, not after a corporal and carnal manner, that is, not physically, but by faith made partakers of his body and blood, with all his benefits, to their spiritual nourishment and growth in grace. That is, when we come to the Lord's Supper, friends, something actually happens. We are fed. We partake of his body and his blood. We receive from him benefits. We are spiritually fed and we grow in grace. Now, why in the world, if this is true, would anybody say, yeah, I don't know, maybe every quarter? It just doesn't make any sense. It's valuable. It has impact. And part of the reason for that, friends, is it's not just a reminder of how sinful we are. It is a drawing near. I like to remind folks, it's like Psalm 128. In Psalm 128, the psalmist is talking about the good life. and how wonderful it is to be sitting around your table with your children like olive plants and your wife like a fruitful vine, and to eat the fruit of your labor. Table fellowship is a place of peace. And when you look through and study on the entire sacrificial system that God gave to his people through Moses, you'll see that at the end of the sacrifice, you don't just bring your animal, the animal gets killed and then burned, and that's the end of it. No, it ends with a meal. It ends with the family and the priest sitting down with God in table fellowship, in a posture of peace. And that's precisely what happens when we come to the table, except it's not the blood of bulls and goats. It's not the flesh of bulls and goats that we're eating. We're eating the flesh of Christ, and we're drinking his blood. That's how near we are coming to him. I just can't believe that God has given us such a gift. And then in turn that we turn our noses up at it. It's shocking. So friends, I want you to, if you're interested, take the time and look this up. It's question 96 of the Westminster Shorter Catechism, and work your way slowly through it as well. Just read through it and stop and think and say, is this how I'm seeing this? When I get to go, when I come, am I remembering all of this, or am I just going through the motions? It's so funny to me that so often, because we're fearful of formalism or ritualism, that rote ritual, that we don't do it very often. And because we don't do it very often, we don't believe what it is. And because we don't believe what it is, when we do it, that's when we're doing it in rote. That's why we think it's not important. It's a glorious thing to draw near to the living God, to come to his table, be welcomed as his children, and to celebrate, all because of what Jesus did for us. We come now in our ongoing series on the Psalms to Psalm 10. Let's jump right in. Why do you stand afar off, O Lord? Why do you hide in times of trouble? The wicked in his pride persecutes the poor. Let them be caught in the plots which they have devised. For the wicked boasts of his heart's desire. He blesses the greedy and renounces the Lord. The wicked in his proud countenance does not see God. God is in none of his thoughts. His ways are always prospering. Your judgments are far above, out of his sight. As for all his enemies, he sneers at them. He has said in his heart, I shall not be moved. I shall never be in adversity. His mouth is full of cursing and deceit and oppression. Under his tongue is trouble and iniquity. He sits in the lurking places of the villages. In the secret places he murders the innocent. His eyes are secretly fixed on the helpless. He lies in wait secretly as a lion in his den. He lies in wait to catch the poor. He catches the poor when he draws them into his net, so he crouches. He lies low that the helpless may fall by his strength. He has said in his heart, God has forgotten. He hides his face. He will never see. Arise, O Lord, O God, lift up your hand. Do not forget the humble. Why do the wicked renounce God? He has said in his heart, you will not require an account. But you have seen, for you observe trouble and grief, to repay it by your hand. The helpless commits himself to you. You are the helper of the fatherless. Break the arm of the wicked and the evil man. Seek out his wickedness until you find none. The Lord is king forever and ever. The nations have perished out of his hand. Lord, you've heard the desire of the humble. You will prepare their heart. You will cause your ear to hear, to do justice to the fatherless and the oppressed, that the man of the earth may oppress no more. We've said in the past, we made note of some sort of themes that come up in more than one occasion in the Psalms, one of which is this lament that God is allowing the wicked to prosper and the righteous to be oppressed. Another is what we call imprecatory psalms, those psalms where the psalmist calls for God to bring hard judgment against his enemies. And we have both of those themes in this particular psalm. The imprecatory part, you might be surprised to know, if you're not that familiar with these, this is actually comparatively mild compared to some other imprecations that we'll come to later in this series. But the psalmist is recognizing a reality. He's recognizing that not only is God not judging now, but that those who are doing wickedly believe, and in some ways they may be right, that they're going to get away with it all their lives. You ever been there? Have you ever been through this process? Let me illustrate it for you here. Someone has spoken ill of you. Someone has misrepresented you. They have harmed your reputation. There's nothing you can do to stop it or undo it. And so in your trouble, maybe looking through the Psalms, you realize, hey, God is the judge of the earth. And a day is coming when this person who has falsely accused me will be judged for it. And I will be vindicated. So far, so good. Then the devil's right there to whisper in your ear and say to you, yeah, that's on the other side. That's after you're dead. That's years and years away. Don't you think if God really cared about you, he'd vindicate you now? I've been through that process. I've cried out along with the psalmist along these lines. This particular one, really sort of hits me where I live in that it talks about these wicked folks, or this wicked person who's hiding in the lurking places of the villages. He's waiting in secret, waiting to catch the poor. It reminds me, truthfully, of many of my internet critics, my most vituperative, vicious, and malevolent internet critic, who, by the way, has multiple names and outlets on the internet and presents himself as an army when he's really just one guy. But nevertheless, this guy does exactly that. He hides behind proxy servers and fake names and all, and he just goes out all over the internet telling everybody I'm the devil. Well, I'm a terrible sinner, no question about it. But I'm not the devil. And this guy, again, is out there attacking my public name without exposing his own name. I know who he is. A few other people know who he is, but my best response is to trust in the Lord. My best response is to believe that it's in his hands and to really ultimately pay little attention. In fact, I have a rule. I don't look at that stuff. I know it's out there. People tell me about it, but I don't look at that stuff. I'm not interested in looking at that stuff. Go read some reviews for some of my books and the negative ones. Not all of them, but many of them are from the same fellow. Different names, same guy. I don't know if he knows this, but his writing style has a very clear tell. Anyway, God is good. And when you feel this despair, when you feel overwhelmed, just what I do is I remind myself, how you feel doesn't matter. What's true is what matters. And what's true is that the judge of all the earth will do rightly, and that I'm safe in his hands. That who shall bring a charge against the Lord's elect? So relax and serve the King and be at peace.
You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.